Okay, we're still dealing in Unit 2 that deals with linkage institutions, and so we're going to look at the evolution of the media from uh, the beginning of our nation until modern day, because obviously media is going to evolve as technology progresses. And so while media has always played a major role in politics, we're going to look at how it has evolved over time. And so we're still dealing with the same learning objectives and the same essential questions as the last lecture. But we begin looking at the evolution of media by looking at print media. And so early news was presented to the people through the printing press, through print press. We obviously didn't have major technology after the, and I say major technology, I'm talking about in relation to modern day. We didn't have big technological pieces like we do today after the nation was created, after we signed the Constitution, etc. And so people are going to have to get their media, have to get their news through print. They're going to have to use newspapers. And in the North American colonies and the early in the early United States, Boston is really going to be the pinnacle of the learned community. They are going to have extremely high literacy rates. They have a significant desire for self-government, and they are actually going to have the first continuous print media that has been continuously going, that was started in 1704. And so the print media is actually going to play a role in informing the citizens of British misdeeds that will eventually incite the revolution. And so we think about the media today sort of inciting people to protest and things like that. Guys, this isn't anything new. The media has always done this. They have always been involved in informing the people of what's going on and essentially helping to incite revolutions, perhaps, or riots, or really talk, not really talk, but force governments into maybe taking different actions on something. And so the media has always played a significant role. And the print media will increase um, the amount of households that become newspaper readers as newspapers become much more available and widespread. People are more literate. We're going to see more households become consumers of media, and so they're going to start reading newspapers. And so the print media is also going to play a role in creating some divisions during the Constitutional Convention. And as we start to see these different factions emerge out of the Constitutional Convention, we're going to see the media play a role in one way or another. They're either going to be helping those for ratification by publishing the Federalist Papers, or helping those against ratification by publishing the Anti-Federalist writings. And so we're going to see in the 1780s, as a result of these factions and different different newspapers becoming involved in political factions, that we have what is known as the party press era, where partisanship and political party loyalty are going to dominate the choice of editorial content. And so depending on what type of political party you're loyal to is going to depend upon, first of all, which newspaper you read on a daily basis, and which editorials you're going to be exposed to. And guys, this isn't anything new. This happens in modern day, but it's not anything new because it was happening back in the 1780s. And then as time progresses, the print media is going to be very significant throughout the 1700s, throughout the most of the 1800s, but we're going to start to see a new form of media emerge in the early 20th century. And so the radio is going to make its appearance in the 1920s. As radio becomes much more utilized and important. You're going to see politicians start to realize that this medium, this new piece of technology can be an excellent tool in reaching the public. And so, for the first time, you're going to be able to. Many people are going to be able to hear the president's voice coming over the airwaves, and it becomes a much more um, personalized participation of people in this electoral process. And so we're going to start to see politicians who become masterful at utilizing the radio as a method to um, reach the people. And so they don't have to do those whistle stop tours as much anymore. They can start engaging in some of this mass media that's going on with radio. And with the beginning of World War II, radios are going to become more and more important and more prevalent as news from the war front is going to reach home. People are going to utilize their radios to hear about their loved ones overseas and what it is that they are taking part in and how the war effort is going against the Germans and the Japanese. And so we're going to see radio become a huge player in the transmission of news and media to people during the Second World War. In 1927, the Radio Act created what was called the Federal Radio Commission, or the FRC, and this was the first attempt or the first effort to regulate radios. And so it's going to be government acts to set standards and frequencies and to license different radio stations. And so if you are going to be on the airwaves, the public airwaves, then you are going to have to be engaged in some regulations from the government. You're going to have to be licensed to give news and programs over the public airwaves. And in 1934, the Communications Act is actually going to end the FRC and create what we are familiar with, which is the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC. After World War II, we're going to start to see radio widen, and FM frequencies are going to start replacing those AM frequencies, and so there's going to be a larger number of different types of programming that is going to be on the radio. And this is really when it's sort of going to reach its peak, because as we progress through the 1920s, the 1930s, the 1940s, into the 1950s after World War II, radio is going to start to wane a little bit, because there is going to be the introduction of this new thing called the television. And so there will be a resurgence a little bit later of radio, and radio is still extremely important. But in the 1980s, even after radio began to wane a little bit after the Second World War, in reverence to or in because of television becoming a new piece of technology that was seen on the world stage. In the 1980s, we're going to start to see the radio make a resurgence, and talk radio is going to become very popular. And even as we move into the 1990s, radio is going to evolve within itself, and so we're going to see a radio broadcasting system called the Sirius Satellite Radio Company that campaigns for the FCC to allow them to operate by utilizing satellites in space. And so it's going to be an evolution of the radio. And so the radio is still extremely important, still utilized by a lot of people, because satellite radio has become a thing, and 2 satellite stations were approved for this process in 2001, and now it's almost impossible to buy a car without having satellite radio in it, and you can subscribe to that system if you would like. And so now it's like cable for your radio, and you can watch or you can listen to any type of radio program you want to listen to, and it comes in lots of different styles and flavors, and you can choose what you listen to. But as I was saying, the radio will start to wane because of the invention of the television. And the television is going to begin the first official broadcast in the United States is going to be in 1939 at the World's Fair in New York, and they're going to broadcast President Franklin Roosevelt's speech at the. I apologize for that. At the World State Fair, and so it's interesting to note that the first official broadcast of television actually went hand in hand with politics because it's going to broadcast a speech by the American president. Um, as World War II is progressing, and some people have the ability to have televisions, the coverage of that war effort is going to increase the popularity of television ownership, and people are going to start to own televisions more and more. Television journalism, will gain a foothold when an individual named Edward R. Murrow, who was a radio personality, will make the move to television in 1951. And Murrow is going to be a very popular, very famous journalist who jumps from radio to television, and people follow him. People like him, they trust him, and so they follow him from radio to television. And so televisions are going to become much more prevalent in society. Again, just like with the radio, television is going to allow politicians to utilize it to connect to the citizens and to the voters. And so they're going to utilize the television to reach out to these individuals. And the first presidential candidates to run political advertisements on the television are going to be Dwight David Eisenhower and Adlai Stevenson, who ran against one another in the 1950s for the presidency. And so, we see the politicians start to realize the potential in televisions as they become more and more prevalent in households across America. In 1952, we're going to see vice presidential candidate Richard M. Nixon use the television to combat some scandals. He had been accused of some things, and he goes on television and he makes his famous checkers speech, and says that he, is not a crook, and the only thing that he's taken as as a gift is a little dog named Checkers, and so we're going to start to see it used as a PR, essentially a PR tool for politicians to come out and reach the people across the nation and debunk some of the scandals and things that have been they have been accused of. In 1960, when John F. Kennedy is running for election, he is going to master the use of the television as a way to promote his candidacy and win over voters. And he is going to use a very Hollywood style approach to promote his image. And this can be illustrated by the first televised debate in the 1960 presidential election between John F. Kennedy and Richard M. Nixon. And a little bit about that presidential debate that is going to be the first one to be televised. There were two mediums that you could use to listen to the debate. You could watch it on television, or you could listen to it on the radio. And if you listened to it on the radio, it sounded as if Richard Nixon won the debate. He gave more substantive answers. He seemed much more experienced when he was talking. But if you watched it on television, Kennedy is going to be masterful at utilizing the camera to sort of put his approach out there. And so if you watch it on television, it's John F. Kennedy won the debate. So there was an interesting dichotomy between watching it on television and watching it or listening to it on the radio. On TV, Kennedy and his advisors, they sort of knew what they were doing. He looked very, he was a younger individual, handsome. He had gone out and gotten a tan because he knew that he was going to be on television. He came across very dapper. He was very charismatic in person, and so that is going to translate to the television camera. And he's up there next to vice presidential candidate or the ex vice president Richard Nixon, who's running for election for the presidency. And Nixon is a kind of an older individual, and if you've ever seen Nixon, he kind of has these jowls that sort of hang down from his face. He had just come off of being ill. I believe he might have had the flu or something like that, and so he was, not looking very well, and the stage lights caused him to sweat profusely. And so when you compared the two on television, it became obvious that John F. Kennedy won the debate. But if you listen to it on the radio, it became obvious that Richard M. Nixon had won the debate. And so it's just going to show how important television will become as we move forward in these different elections. And so as we progress from 1976 onward, televised debates become a regular part of presidential campaigns, and we still see them in modern day. They're advertised, or the debates are going to be broadcast on regular channels, ABC, CBS, etc., so that everybody can have access to them. And so they're, I don't know how good they do in swaying in any individual, but we have had televised debates on in the presidential campaign since 1976. There have been some really good examples of the power of television that have occurred when presidents are able to inspire and comfort the population during a national tragedy. And a couple that come to mind is when the space shuttle Challenger exploded. President Reagan is able to go on television and give this really awe-inspiring speech in memory of these individuals, and it's going to be broadcast on television, and it sort of helps to rally the people in times of this national tragedy and emergency. In 9/11, we see President Bush give a speech from a bullhorn at Ground Zero, and it helps to comfort the population. And so television is going to have a huge impact on how politicians can interact with their citizens, and it's going to be utilized to reach out to these individuals on a very large scale to sort of comfort the nation when necessary, or reach out to the nation when necessary. And so as television has progressed and evolved, there have also been some technological advancements that allow for some other news media trends. One of the news media trends is this thing called horse race coverage. And this is when modern journalists analyze campaigns, they analyze blunders, but they don't really engage the candidates. They don't really discuss the issues. They give a very shallow overview of what is going on. And if you're horse racing, obviously you're going very, very fast. So they're just trying to cover a lot of ground without really going very deep. And so we see this all the time. We see the news focus on blunders that are made, or gaffes, or issues that are made when we're not really talking about the substantive issue that is at play in the campaign. There's citizen journalism, which has occurred because of the use of personal recording devices, and as cell phones become cameras and they become camcorders all in one little device so that you can fit in your pocket, people are able to capture events, post them on the internet. They can go viral, and so it has sort of opened the floodgates for individuals to engage in some kind of journalism, and this is referred to as citizen journalism. Then there's soft news, which is presenting news in an entertaining and approachable manner. It helps to painlessly introduce a variety of topics. So anytime you watch like Saturday Night Live or the late shows who make light of a lot of the things that are facing the nation. This is really soft news, but it's much more palatable to individuals than watching the actual news because, you know, if you put satire into it or you make it funny, then it's obviously less offensive. And so we're going to stop here for today, and in the next lecture we'll continue with media because it does have such a significant, profound impact on politics, and so stay tuned for that.